So there's a thing going around where archery is really easy and anyone can shoot well, and it's kind of like learning how to ride a bike. So once you learn it, you don't forget it. And by extension, that means you could leave your bow for a few months, pick it up, and still shoot well. Unfortunately, that's not quite how it works. Today, we're talking about skill decay. As with nearly every activity, whether it's a sport or a hobby, if you don't continually practice it, you will experience a deterioration of your ability. Before anything else, do you understand that to experience a deterioration in skill, you need to have first attained a level of skill? And this again seems obvious and goes without saying, but some people do forget that archery does require a lot of skill. Sure, anyone can shoot arrows in the backyard and hit a giant target, but there are much more finer elements to archery than just pulling a string back and letting it go. And to that extent, understand that if you haven't trained yourself to that higher level of proficiency or competition, this may not make that much sense to you. Hence why we'll go into more detail over where an archer can fall apart if they don't maintain a strict and regular training routine. The first element is physical conditioning. And again, this is fairly obvious to archers, but to non-archers, they may underrate how much physical intensity goes into doing archery. Archery isn't just a focus or concentration or skill-based sport. It is a physically demanding sport, and it does require strength and endurance. Unfortunately, the muscles that you need to be a proficient or skilled archer are not muscles which you utilize every day. These do require specific training to build up and control well. And thus, if you are out of practice, this is the first thing you feel when you come back to archery. It's that sensation of, oh man, I can just barely handle this. This is also a mistake which many archers make when picking their equipment, and that is picking a draw weight that is too high for them to maintain. Now, many people are driven to pick draw weights based on distance or purpose. For example, you may need a very heavy bow to go hunting, or you may want to enjoy a really powerful bow because you can have a much better flight over long distance. And that's a good purpose to work towards. However, most people do not have a natural, innate ability to build up to that level. They need to actually work for it in order to shoot a bow comfortably. And again, that requires a regular training routine. So if you're someone who is generally quite fit, goes to the gym, loves the outdoors, generally a good, active, healthy person, then sure, you should be able to adapt to most draw weights. However, not everyone is like that, especially for people like me who are a bit more sedate, we have smaller frames, we're not particularly muscular, then it can be quite a challenge to work up to a higher weight because, like with other sports like boxing, people have certain natural body types or body weights which are more suitable to certain sports. So for someone like me to shoot a 40 or 50 pound bow, I would have to actually train quite hard. And in saying that, I would have to also sustain that routine, because if I don't, I will find these heavier draw weights challenging to use. So as we said, this is one of the first things that you have to keep in mind when you don't practice for long periods of time. Again, some people will naturally retain their strength through their daily activities. Others will have to go out of their way in order to attain the same level of strength and stamina. And my advice here is that if you are at the stage where you're choosing your bow or choosing your draw weight, then choose a weight which you can reasonably maintain. Not the weight that you necessarily want to use, but the weight that you can handle. If you want to shoot a heavier draw weight, you will have to work for it. You can't just pick a 50 pound bow and expect to draw it back comfortably every single time with no practice. So be realistic in your goals. Because the reality is that if you don't regularly train with a heavy bow, you cannot be proficient with it. The second element that is often forgotten or lost is the skill aspect or the process. And this is the part which most people don't actually see. For many people, they think archery is simply pulling the string back and letting it go. But there's a lot more to it. And this is really the risk with not training regularly. It's losing that skill. You see, there are actually dozens of smaller steps that an archer has to focus on. Everything from their stance, their posture, their finger positioning, their bow grip, all the steps in the shot process must be carefully fine-tuned. And this is something which is only fine-tuned with hours upon hours of practice. And in saying that, it's actually even more punishing with an Olympic recurve because there are more things on this bow which tell you you're doing it wrong. You actually can't shoot this unless you know how to do it properly. And people who shoot these compared to forms of archery may struggle more to reacquire that skill because they've been out of it for too long. A traditional bow is a bit more forgiving as people often have lower expectations and there are generally more variables anyway. So people are okay with pulling a trad bow back. Now, with that said, there are a lot of parts which can change because you haven't practiced. So we'll go through a few small things. The first general element is just process. As I said before, there are many steps in the process which an archer has to remember. But an archer that trains very frequently will have a very predictable shot cycle. Every part from start to finish is going to be identical. And they will know that something will feel different or feel wrong just because they've done the same thing 1,000 times a week. Now, somebody who hasn't trained frequently or has fallen out of the training schedule will find themselves with a lot more variation in each part of the process. For example, they may lift the bow up slightly differently each time, or left or right very slightly, or draw somewhat low or somewhat high or somewhat to the side, and the end result might be the same. But the way they get there is going to be different each time. And this is some of the hallmarks of skill decay. That is, you don't quite get the same flow and rhythm each and every time. And this flow and rhythm is among the hardest things for an archer to attain, but also the easiest to lose without regular practice. Some smaller specific elements, anchor points will drift. People have very specific anchor points, and because the anchor point will determine the alignment of the shot, if you miss this by a few millimeters, then your shot is going to be different. So knowing exactly where to anchor, again, is kind of hard for someone who shoots infrequently. Someone who shoots very frequently will have that touch each and every time. On a similar note, head position is prone to change. Your head need to be in a certain set position to have the right alignment anchor point, and when you don't practice frequently, you will forget where your head should be. Release and back tension are also critical parts which are forgotten without practice. This is perhaps the first thing you lose that edge with. It's that very delicate final moment before the shot where you expand, you release, and things should come out cleanly. This is, again, one of the hardest things to reach as an archer, and it's something that must be maintained, especially for a recurve or a finger shooter where you don't have any aids to help you with the release. That is really tough. And again, many people who come back will find this to be the hardest thing to get right, especially if you're shooting Olympic recurve where you can't quite get through the clicker, or if you're shooting without it, you can't quite get the right expansion and you keep collapsing, especially again with a heavier draw weight. All these things are easily lost over time. And going beyond the physical side, you have the visual and the psychological element of archery. Again, the ability to line a shot up and execute it proficiently and confidently, that comes with a lot of practice. Even what the sight picture looks like, the way the target looks when you're at full draw, it's something which you can't retain. So if you don't maintain that visual training, then you lose that edge. And a lot of people come back to archery and struggle to group because they can't quite get that alignment and sight picture correct. Most of these things are in the back of your mind when you shoot. So because of that, if you don't maintain a regular training routine, then these things are forgotten. These are not tangible things that you can record and measure and do right each and every time. A lot of it is about retaining the right feeling. And I think anybody who's taken a break from archery and come back will describe that exact loss of feeling, getting the right feeling of the shot. And it does take a while to get back into archery with that feeling. Now, in the ideal world, you would be able to train every single day without any commitments. Of course, not everyone can do that. So what advice would I give? Now, there is one caveat before we begin. This doesn't affect compound shooters as much. This is arguable, but compound bows are already set up to be super accurate, and the user simply has to line it up and execute a clean shot. Now, I'm not saying this to say that compound shooters have it easy or to disparage them, but in fairness, your bow is doing most of the work. And this is exactly the reason why many people choose compound over recurve. It's easy to attain a level of proficiency sooner, and you lose less of it over time. Many people can leave the compound bow for months, if not years, put it back together, bring it up, and still shoot fairly proficiently. Now, I find it funny as a recurve shooter that you see compound people come back to the sport after their hiatus, and they're like, oh wow, I only got like 290 out of 300 in the indoor round. Like, oh my God, like that's a godly round for us. But for a compound, it's like, yeah, it's pretty average. So anyway, this is important to note because, again, compound shooters or people who want to shoot compound will actually benefit from this advantage because you don't have to maintain it as strictly as a recurve shooter or traditional shooter. So first things first, train as regularly as you can. Serious shooters or competitive shooters will train several times a week, if not every day. And that also applies to holidays and vacations. They'll find a way to train, either by bringing training materials like stretching bands, or bringing the entire bow kit and finding a club to shoot at. And I've had that come here actually. People have traveled interstate to see family, they've brought their bows down and used our range to practice to maintain that arrow volume and that routine. Now, if you train less frequently, like once a week, this is where you're most at risk because you're already on the edge between barely retaining your current skill or making any progress at all and losing it right away. Many people will turn up on a Saturday morning, they'll shoot, and then they won't come back for 2 or 3 weeks. There's really no progress there. So understand that most of the gains that you get actually aren't tangible. So you need to respect the need to train a bit more frequently. If you do miss out on a week, then it's going to severely impact your progress. And you have to be honest to yourself too. If you are going to do archery as a sport, you will have to commit. You can't say that you've done a year of archery when you've only turned up like 20 times a year. That means every week you miss means you come back and you figuratively reinvent the wheel. You have to learn how to stand again, learn how to anchor again, reacquire your sight picture, and do everything over and over again without making any real progress. Now, one way to mitigate this is to keep a learning journal, and this could be a written journal or could be a video journal, but not just making it, but reviewing it frequently. That means reading your own learning diary or watching your own form videos. And people tend to avoid this because they don't want to see themselves shoot, there's a lot of self-consciousness. That's fine. But again, if you want to maintain your progress and maintain your skill level, then you really should take these steps. The more you review your own learning, the more you retain it. So if you do have to take a week off, you can revisit your diary or your journal and read through what you learned that previous week. It might be a certain feeling, a certain anchor point, it might be a visual description or even an illustration or a diagram, something to get you continually thinking about archery. And that can help slow down that skill decay. And in fact, I can't overrate the importance of mental training and visualization. And the more you do this, even when you can't do archery, the more you maintain how clear and vivid that sight picture should be and what your process should look like. To conclude, skill decay is a real problem, and many people don't actually appreciate how much time it takes to become proficient in archery. And you can do archery for years and not reach that level of proficiency which you want because you simply haven't put the time in. If you do invest the time to your training, then you should also respect the fact that if you don't maintain it, then you will stand to lose much of your progress. Sure, you might be making steps forward, but if you miss sessions and take time off, you are taking steps backwards. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting and helpful. This is NUSensei. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.